Happy Saturday, folks, and welcome back to WrestleRant here today. I am Graham Jason Matthews, breaking down the 1998 WWE SummerSlam pay-per-view event as seen on the WWE Network. The entire summer season long, I'm reviewing every single installment of SummerSlam I already haven't talked about, including the 02, 08, 2011, and 2013 shows already up here in the channel from last year. 1988 is also from last year, but 1989 to 1997 have been up here in the channel for the last couple of weeks. So as I mentioned, 1998 SummerSlam, a really fun event. I mean, that really shouldn't come as much of a surprise considering this was kind of the beginning of the Attitude Era. Not the beginning, but the beginning of the Attitude Era SummerSlam shows. I kind of consider that to be last year, 97, but you know, it's funny because I didn't really enjoy too much the WrestleMania events from the Attitude Era. I still think the best series of WrestleManias, in my opinion, was probably 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. We haven't had a great consistent streak of WrestleMania since that period in time, in my opinion. The WrestleManias 13, 14, 15, and 16, I didn't really care too much for. They're not bad shows. It's just one man's opinion, and I talked about that in my WrestleMania reviews during WrestleMania season earlier this year. But the SummerSlam shows so far have been pretty good. I love the 1997 show. The 1998 show is no different. So kicking off the show for the European Championship was D'Lo Brown defending against Val Venus. And what I liked about this match, and I mean it was kind of par for the course during the Attitude Era, was that each character had a character. You know, each superstar had something that they could sink their teeth into, had a reason for the crowd to care about them. Prime example being D'Lo Brown being the European champion at that time. I mean, the European title, kind of a random championship. Not many Europeans held that belt. But when D'Lo Brown held it, okay, sure, he's European champion, who cares? But what made him stand out amongst the rest of the European champions was that when he was being introduced to the ring during his in-ring introduction, the announcer would announce him from a different part of Europe each time. And the commentators talked about how he was moving from different parts of Europe during his stint as European champion. It was so entertaining. I thought it was great. And he also had the chest protector at that time. And then what can be said about Val Venus? One of the most entertaining and, I don't know if iconic is the word, but one of the most memorable characters during that period in time in wrestling was Val Venus. And every single time on the mic, he just made me crack up with what he had to say. I don't remember what the line was that he said before this match. I remember hearing it. Was it on the WWE list? Or maybe it was on Countdown? I don't remember exactly which one I heard it on, but I think it might have been the list, but it was so funny. It might have been the Rubik's Cube one where it said, you know, I'm too hard to figure out, but something like that. It was hilarious, though. But these two actually had a really good match. I mean, it was no steel cage match, Mankind versus Hunter Hearst Helmsley from the year before. But for what it was, I thought it was really good. A very well-wrestled match, especially down the stretch. I mean, with the exception of one botch, I think it was D'Lo Brown looking to hit a powerbomb on Val Venus, and he kind of, maybe he slipped because he was all sweaty and oily. I don't know what the reason for that was. But other than that one botch kind of down the stretch, it was a really good match, especially for a match that really didn't mean all that much for the European Championship. They got some good time, 15 minutes. In the end, D'Lo Brown retains the European title, so I thought it was a really good match to kick off the show. After that, we had an 8-man tag team match, or rather a 4-on-3 tag team match, pitting the Oddities against the team of Kaientai rather, excuse me. And it was a fun little match. I'm surprised it went 10 minutes. It didn't feel like 10 minutes at all. It felt more like 4 or 5. And I've talked about this. I don't know if I've talked about this here on WrestleRant before. I know I talked about it on Twitter months ago. But when I came across the Oddities, I think I heard about them in Countdown or something like that. I fell in love with the group. I'm not saying they're one of the greatest stables of all time, but especially the entrance music was so awesome to me when they performed with the Insane Clown Posse. They came down to the ring doing the catchy dance and stuff, and the crowd was into it. You know, they weren't a great wrestling team. The match sucked. I mean, for a while it lasted, the match was not good, but they were so entertaining as a team, especially their entrance. I was drawn to them. And that being said, I was very disappointed that they cut out their entire entrance from this pay-per-view. Probably due to the fact that they had copyright issues with the Insane Clown Posse, and even after they won, they completely cut out the celebration. You couldn't hear their theme song, with the exception of like a few seconds when they cut to the street or something like that. So I was kind of disappointed. They cut out the entire entrance of the Oddities as well as the post-match celebration, because I was really looking forward to hearing their entrance theme performed by the Insane Clown Posse. But for what it was not a good match, especially with the Oddities involved. But they were a fun team for what they were, as I mentioned before. Up next in a hair versus hair match, X-Pac taking on Jeff Jarrett. The match itself, I didn't really care too much for, but like I talked about my 1997 review of SummerSlam, each match meant something. That's what it was, the exact definition of the Attitude Era. That's what was so great about it. I mean, the constant face and heel turns, the random storylines and stuff like that weren't really for me. The wrestling was not the greatest by any stretch. But at least each character, unlike today, had a story. They had a reason for the crowd to care about them, like I said earlier. And the same thing with the matches, too. There was rarely a meaningless match. There might have been a bad match, sure. Those were not far and few between in the Attitude Era, but at least each match had a meaning. This one included, with the hair of both men being on the line. Whoever lost had to shave their head. So the match was good. I mean, it wasn't great, but for what it was decent. In the end, X-Pac ended up going over after all this interference from Jeff Jarrett's boys and D-Generation X. X-Pac went over and had to shave the head of Jeff Jarrett afterwards. That kind of took forever, but the match itself was decent, and at least you kind of had a reason to care about who would win, because something so meaningful was on the line, especially considering the hair was kind of a signature, was Jeff Jarrett's signature thing. That was kind of his signature, I guess, is the thing I'm looking for here, a part of his look. So it was kind of a big deal for him to get his head shaved. But yeah, the match was okay, but I was kind of happier rather, not more happy, that they had the match means something by having a guy's hair put on the line. And I don't know if I've talked about it here on WrestleRant before, here on WrestleRant, but when people get a haircut nowadays, not a haircut, but when people get their head shaved, I've noticed it more in TNA than in WWE. They don't turn it into a storyline. I remember Kazarian a couple years ago, maybe back in 2012, he shaved his head. And this is the same guy who had those long locks for a very, very long time. And he just shaved his head without no storyline consistency, or no mention within the storyline or whatever. It would have meant more had he lost a match and he had to shave his head in the middle of the ring. Unless he was doing it for charity or something like that, I don't know why you wouldn't incorporate it in a part of the storyline if you're going to shave your head anyway. That's just kind of nitpicking. But yeah, decent stuff from X-Pac and Jeff Jarrett on this show. Up next, we had a mixed tag team match pitting Edge and Sable against Mark Mero and Jacqueline. So Edge was the mystery tag team partner of Sable here. A really fun match while it lasted. I mean, I was never really... Sable was actually much better in the ring than I thought she was. She wasn't great. She wasn't like a Lita or a Trish Stratus, but given how over she was, she kind of backed it up in the ring, and Mark Mero and Jacqueline were a fun little pairing as well. Edge got a huge boost from being the partner of Sable in this match and kind of debuting that year as well, I think. Was it 98? I believe it was 98. And the match was really fun. I mean, they only got about 8 minutes, but they made the most of that, and Edge and Sable went over and picked up a big win, and also furthering the feud between Mark Mero and Jacqueline on this show. Up next, we had Ken Shamrock versus Owen Hart in a Lion's Den match. So this match did not take place in the arena itself. It took place somewhere else. I forgot where it was. In the middle of a cage, kind of very UFC style. Like I said, they called it the Lion's Den. They didn't call it the cage or whatever. So kind of WWE's branding of it, but it felt more like a UFC fight than it did a WWE match. And it was, I'm not going to say it was great, but it was interesting. It was something new and innovative, so I'll give them that much. Ken Shamrock was at home inside the cage, so it was kind of very fitting of his style, and Owen Hart was always great as well. Unfortunately, his last SummerSlam before passing away the following spring. It was an interesting... It was an interesting match, to say the least. I can definitely say that much. And Ken Shamrock ultimately went over. And they had his feud going on with Den Severin, also a former UFC alumni. If I'm correct, if my knowledge serves me correctly. So they did also have that writing on it as well. But yeah, a little interesting, a fun little matchup, I guess, for what it was. Like I said, nothing great, but the environment and the crowd was wild for it. They loved Ken Shamrock. They loved Owen Hart. I mean, he was a heel at that time, but they were just glad to be seeing something special going on before their very eyes. I'm not exactly sure what happened in the arena while this was going on. I guess they might have shown a video of it. to the live crowd as SummerSlam is going on in the arena. So that was kind of strange, especially for just one match. I guess it might have been too much to build that structure in the middle of the ring during the pay-per-view. I was kind of confused about that, but it was, as I mentioned, interesting, and Ken Shamrock went over. Up next, a no disqualification handicap match for the WWF Tag Team titles, pitting Mankind, the current champion, against the New Age Outlaws. A basic handicap match. I mean, it's weird to say that this match was kind of like, not the worst. It sounds a lot harsh. It sounds harsher than it actually is. But compared to a lot of the stuff that we got before this, it was kind of didn't really pique my interest all that much. A 2-on-1 handicap match, and I'm not really a handicap match fan. I mean, it's one thing to have 4-on-3, but then to have a 2-on-1 is, we see too many of those matches nowadays, but it did make sense to have the New Age Outlaws go over. They won the belts from Mankind. It was a big night for D-Generation X, as I mentioned before, with Triple H going over, the New Age Outlaws, the X-Pac going over earlier, so a huge night for DX on this show. Not a great match. I mean, it was no disqualification. That definitely enhanced the matchup a little bit. I mean, it wasn't your basic handicap match. At least the no disqualification stipulation kind of allowed them to do a little bit more than they would have if they were restricted to that standard, regular DQ count-out matchup. So it was fine for what it was. Nothing too exciting, but at least the New Age Outlaws came out on top. Logically captured when I say logically, I mean they were unable, Mankind was unable to overcome the odds. It fit perfectly with his gimmick, and the New Age Outlaws weren't made to look weak by losing in this match, unless there was interference, which there was not. But in the end, New Age Outlaws beat Mankind to recapture the WWF Tag Team titles. Up next, for the Intercontinental Championship, and my personal favorite match on this show, and I'm sure for a lot of other people as well, for the Intercontinental Championship, the ladder match, pitting Triple H against the then champion, The Rock. And I remember hearing about this match and seeing clips and whatnot, and after, especially 4 years, or rather 3 years removed from the amazing match at SummerSlam, the only gem on that show between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon at SummerSlam 1995, I mean, it's really hard to say which one was better. I'm not going to spend any time talking about that. I mean, it's very subjective. I mean, I enjoyed both matches for different reasons. I thought that one told a better story, but the in-ring action in this match I thought was excellent. A lot of chaos going on. Chyna was in the corner of Triple H, and The Rock also had Mark Henry and the rest of the Nation of Domination. So a lot of craziness involved, and they told a great story. Triple H was kind of the beloved babyface going into this matchup, ultimately recapturing the Intercontinental Championship in one of the all-time classic ladder matches, in a match that I don't think it's talked about enough. When we talk about the greatest ladder matches of all time in WWE, obviously you're going to think of Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon from either SummerSlam or WrestleMania, and rightfully so. And, a lot of the most recent ladder matches were good. I don't think they were nearly as good as this one. But, I don't know. I feel like this match is underrated. I don't feel it. Maybe it's not, but I feel like it's not talked about often enough for as great as it was, in my opinion anyway. And I really enjoyed it, and it was great to see the IC title showcased in such a way that is not today, and especially considering both guys have eventually went on to capture world title gold and become two of the greatest athletes, two of the greatest superstars this business has ever seen. So it did a lot to lend credibility to the Intercontinental Championship and make that match mean even more in retrospect. So I thought it was a great match, especially the aftermath as well. One of the all-time great feuds between Triple H and The Rock before they kind of rekindled that rivalry back in 2000, 2 years later, over the WWE title. So a great match overall, and thoroughly enjoyed that. And we get to the main event for the WWF Championship, Stone Cold Steve Austin defending the gold against The Undertaker. Now, what I loved about this match, and I mean, this was kind of smack dab right in the middle of the Attitude Era. You would think that there's tons of interference and whatnot, but there really wasn't. There wasn't any interference at all, if I remember correctly. Maybe Kane showed up at one point. I think that was afterwards. But it was great. I think they really, truly captured the big fight feel of this contest. I mean, on paper, Stone Cold versus Undertaker is a big fucking match. That's a big match between two of the biggest superstars this company, as I said with Triple H and Rock, has ever seen. And I thought from an in-ring standpoint, I mean, I regret it now not putting it, I don't think I put it on my top 10 best WWE title matches in SummerSlam history. I wrote an article about that for What Culture last summer. I think I forgot to leave it out. I think I did leave it out. And in retrospect, after watching it in full, I think I regret doing so. This was a great match. Not the greatest WWE title match of all time in SummerSlam history, but for what it was, a really, really good match. They built up the feud well between Stone Cold and Undertaker, between two of the biggest icons, as I mentioned, in the last 20, 30 years of all time, rather. And then it definitely sold me on this being a big fight feel match, with there being no interference, a straightforward contest, and Stone Cold Steve Austin won it clean. That was what surprised me moreover than anything else. Undertaker and Stone Cold showing respect to one another after the match, and Kane came down. So a great way of going out the show and closing out a very entertaining event. I thought this was a very, very good show. Maybe even more so than the 97 event, which I thought was also very good. But this show was very well rounded, and there wasn't one match that I didn't like. Even the handicap match, the first one between the Oddities and Kai and Tai, held my interest somewhat because I like the Oddities. They're a guilty pleasure of mine. And then even the other handicap match was kind of newsworthy for the fact we had new champions crowned, new tag team champions crowned. But overall, I thought this was a great show, and I thought it was funny that a lot of these SummerSlam pay-per-views were even more entertaining than the WrestleMania events from their respective years. So we'll see if that continues to be the trend with the SummerSlam 1999 show, which I'll review on Tuesday. No review this Sunday, but coming this Tuesday though, my review of SummerSlam 1999. So definitely go out of your way to watch this show on the WWE Network, if only for the final two matches, two awesome main event matches between Rock and Triple H and then Stone Cold and Undertaker for the Intercontinental and WWF titles respectively. And the undercard was very good too. A lot of matches that held my interest. They meant something. They weren't random. A lot of feuds they had a lot riding on them at that time and truly captured the big spectacle feel of being the WrestleMania of the summer. So watch it back on the WWE Network when you get a chance. And as I mentioned, I'll be back on Tuesday with my review of WWE SummerSlam 1999. But in the meantime and in between time, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant, on Facebook at facebook.com/Graham.gsm.Matthews. Also, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. And a brief mention here, if you're listening to this on Saturday when this is up, or on Sunday rather, it doesn't really matter. Sometime this weekend, I will not be doing live coverage of the Battleground pay-per-view on Sunday night. I just recently learned I'll be working that night from 4 to 10, so I'll be watching the pay-per-view after the fact at like 10:30 or something like that. I'll be hopefully watching it that night. So no live coverage of the show at nextdayWrestling.net, but you can go to the website and check out my full written reviews of Battleground after the fact. It should be up by late Sunday night, of Raw, SmackDown, Teen Impact Wrestling, NXT, Lucha Underground, Ring of Honor, and everything else in between. A lot of content up on the website, and also my full predictions for the pay-per-view on Sunday if you're listening to this before the pay-per-view. But as I mentioned, guys, have a great weekend. Enjoy Battleground on Sunday night, and I'll catch you guys down the road.